You know that strange feeling when you look at your spending and the damage makes no sense, because there is nothing dramatic enough to blame. You did not buy a luxury watch, you did not book a first-class flight, and you did not make one giant reckless decision that obviously ruined the month. What happened instead was quieter and more dangerous, because normal life kept charging you extra for being rushed, tired, late, overloaded, and out of room. You paid for faster delivery, grabbed takeout when the day got messy, took an Uber because you were running late, renewed something without checking the price, bought whatever was available instead of whatever was best, and kept saying yes to expensive convenience because life did not leave you enough room to do anything smarter. Individually, those decisions do not feel like the kind of mistakes that keep people broke, which is exactly why they are so dangerous. A lot of people think their money problems come from overspending, weak discipline, or wanting too many nice things, but that is often not the real mechanism. The real mechanism is that they are living without margin, without enough slack in time, money, attention, and energy to make calm decisions. And once your life loses margin, almost everything gets more expensive. Direct question, are you actually overspending, or is your life so tight that you keep buying relief? You pay more for speed, more for convenience, more for urgency, more for weak timing, more for bad negotiation, more for low-quality decisions, and more for the fact T76253 life keeps forcing you to solve problems in the most expensive possible moment. That is the hidden rule in this video. When your life has no margin, ordinary problems start billing you like emergencies. And if normal life has felt more expensive than it should, even when you are not trying to live large, this is probably going to explain why more clearly than normal budgeting advice does. Because a lot of people are not broke because they are chasing luxury. They are broke because their life has no breathing room. What margin actually is? When I say margin, I am not talking about something abstract or corporate sounding. I mean the gap between what life demands from you and what you can handle without immediately slipping into stress, urgency, and expensive reactions. Money margin means you have enough cash buffer that a surprise bill does not instantly turn into a crisis. Time margin means your day is not packed so tightly that every delay forces you into shortcuts, rush costs, and sloppy decisions. Energy margin means you still have enough mental bandwidth left at the end of the day to do the cheaper, slower, smarter thing instead of the easiest thing. When people have margin, they can wait, compare, plan, say no, fix things early, and recover from inconvenience without throwing money at it. When people do not have margin, every inconvenience becomes a money event. That is the trap. Because the problem is not only that bad things happen, the problem is that without slack, even normal things become expensive. A late train becomes an Uber. A long day becomes delivery. A crowded week becomes wasted groceries. A forgotten renewal becomes a higher price. A small repair becomes a larger repair. A weak job becomes something you tolerate longer than you should, because you cannot afford the breathing room it would take to make a better move. Counterintuitive claim. One of the most valuable financial assets in adult life is empty space. This is why two people can make similar incomes and still live inside completely different financial realities. One person is paying for life. The other person is paying for life under pressure. Those are not the same thing. Why normal life gets so expensive without it? Once you start looking at money through this lens, a lot of things begin to make more sense. The reason normal life feels expensive is not always because normal life is inherently expensive. It is because normal life gets processed through urgency. Urgency is expensive. Urgent groceries are more expensive than planned groceries. Urgent transport is more expensive than planned transport. Urgent housing decisions are more expensive than patient housing decisions. Urgent borrowing is more expensive than having cash. Urgent repairs are more expensive than maintenance. Urgent purchases are more expensive than considered purchases. Urgent career decisions are more expensive than having the ability to wait. Urgent decisions are rarely just inconvenient. They are usually premium priced. This is one of the quietest wealth differences between people who look similar from the outside. The financially stronger person is often not making genius moves every week. They just have enough slack to avoid paying panic prices over and over again. And panic prices do not always look dramatic. Sometimes the panic price is a delivery fee, a convenience fee, a late fee, a bad financing offer, an overpriced flight booked too late, a subscription you forgot to cancel, a rushed decision that locks you into a mediocre deal, or a month where the whole budget quietly leaks because there was no room to do better. That is why this problem hides so well. It does not arrive wearing a giant sign that says financial mistake. It arrives dressed as a busy week, a stressful morning, a small emergency, a perfectly understandable shortcut, or one of those moments where you tell yourself you will clean everything up properly later. But later is usually more expensive. The psychology of no margin. The reason people stay in this pattern is not because they are stupid, and it is not because they lack character. It is because stress changes how you make decisions. When your life has no margin, your brain stops thinking in terms of optimization and starts thinking in terms of relief. You do not ask, what is the best financial move here over the next 3 years? You ask, how do I make this problem go away in the next 20 minutes? That is a completely different question, and it usually produces a more expensive answer. Here is where the trap gets vicious, because once your brain is managing too many immediate fires, it stops protecting your future and starts paying for whatever ends the fire fastest. Scarcity is so destructive for exactly that reason. It does not just mean you have less money. It means your attention gets dragged into immediate problems until long-term thinking gets weaker. That is how people end up making decisions that look irrational from the outside, but feel completely reasonable in the moment. If you are exhausted, behind, under pressure, and mentally overloaded, paying extra to remove friction does not feel like a luxury. It feels like survival. That is what makes the no-margin trap so sneaky. The spending often feels justified because it is solving a real problem. The issue is that you keep solving real problems in expensive ways because your life never gives you the room to solve them cheaply. A stressed brain will gladly spend $20 to remove a 5-minute annoyance and call it practicality. There is also a status element here that people do not talk about enough. A lot of adults want to look stable even when they feel strained, so they keep choosing the smoother, cleaner, less awkward option in public. They take the faster route, the nicer option, the easier yes, the thing that keeps the day moving and preserves the appearance of control. That image management has a price tag, and when you are low on margin, you are often paying it while telling yourself it is no big deal. The math nobody does. Shocking stat. Leak $110 a week for 25 years and, at normal market returns, you are not losing a few bad habits. You are losing something near $400,000. Let us make this concrete, because this pattern sounds soft and psychological until you put numbers on it. Imagine someone loses money in 5 ordinary ways each week. They spend $30 on convenience food because the plan fell apart, $20 on rush transport because timing got tight, $15 on delivery fees or small upgrades because they needed the easy option, $25 on impulse spending caused by stress, and another $20 from forgotten renewals, weak comparison shopping, or little avoidable leaks. That is $110 a week. Over a month, that is roughly $470. Over a year, that is about $5,640. Now let that same amount compound at 8% for 25 years, and you are looking at something in the range of $400,000. That is what hidden no-margin spending can become. Not because you were living lavishly, but because your life kept charging you for being cornered. And that number becomes even uglier when you remember that living without margin also tends to create debt, which means some of that leakage is not just money leaving. It is money leaving with interest attached. This is why small repeated pressure matters so much more than people think. A single expensive month is one thing. A lifestyle built around low slack is an economic system. It keeps producing the same kind of losses in slightly different outfits. How no margin blocks wealth. The real problem with this pattern is not just that it drains money, it also blocks momentum. People talk about wealth as if it is mostly about earning more, picking better investments, or becoming unusually disciplined. But a huge part of wealth building is simply having enough room to make decent decisions consistently. Margin gives you the power to wait. Waiting matters a lot more than most people realize. If you have cash, you can wait for the better deal instead of financing the first solution. If you have time, you can compare before buying instead of paying whatever today demands. If you have energy, you can cook instead of ordering, maintain instead of replacing, cancel instead of forgetting, and plan instead of reacting. If you have a financial buffer, you can leave the weak job, say no to the manipulative offer, negotiate harder, and avoid turning every inconvenience into debt. Bad timing destroys more middle-class money than bad taste. People often think money creates options because rich people get better toys. That is not the important part. Money creates options because margin lets you refuse bad timing. And bad timing is where a shocking amount of middle-class money gets destroyed. This is also why living without margin makes people feel like they are working hard without getting ahead. They are not only paying their bills, they are paying the tax of having no room. The tax shows up in rushed solutions, bad timing, convenience dependence, chronic low-level stress, and the inability to make patient decisions. That tax is quiet, but it is enormous. The difference between a stable person and a strained person. This becomes easiest to see when you compare two people who look almost identical on paper and end up living inside completely different prices. Imagine two people making the same income, living in the same city, and facing the same general prices. The first person has a small emergency buffer, a slightly calmer schedule, 1 day each month to reset admin, automatic transfers, and enough breathing room to absorb mild inconvenience without immediately throwing money at it. The second person has almost no buffer, no empty space in the week, constant mental overload, irregular routines, and a life where one delay keeps crashing into the next one. The first person notices a car issue early and fixes it for $300. The second person ignores it because the week is packed, the problem gets worse, and now it costs $1,100. The first person shops insurance when renewal comes up. The second person forgets and pays the lazy price for another year. The first person can wait a week before buying something non-urgent. The second person buys under pressure because there is no room to think. The first person can tolerate a short gap between jobs. The second person cannot, so they accept whatever is available. Same paycheck does not mean same financial physics. Pressure changes the price of almost everything. From the outside, the difference does not always look like intelligence. It looks like calm. But calm is often just a visible symptom of margin. And margin is one of the most underappreciated financial assets in adult life. Why people misdiagnose this? Most people blame themselves for this pattern in the wrong way. They think they need stricter discipline, a tighter budget, a more aggressive plan, or a harsher internal voice. But the problem is often not that they are too soft. The problem is that their life is too compressed. A compressed life makes cheap decisions harder. That matters. Because if you keep trying to fix an overloaded life with more rules instead of more breathing room, you usually create an even more fragile system. Then the system breaks, and once it breaks, the expensive behavior returns because the underlying issue was never the absence of rules. It was the absence of margin. More rules on a compressed life usually create more failure, not more control. This is why some financial advice feels good in theory and collapses in practice. It assumes you have enough time, enough attention, enough cash, enough emotional energy, and enough flexibility to execute perfectly. But most people are trying to manage money while also managing fatigue, deadlines, family logistics, maintenance, noise, errands, and a brain that is already crowded. That is why the real upgrade is not always becoming more disciplined. Sometimes the real upgrade is becoming less cornered. How to build margin without becoming a monk. This is the point where a lot of advice goes wrong. It tells you to become more intense, more optimized, more restrictive, and more impressive. That is usually not what fixes this. You do not need to become a monk. You need to make your life less punishable by small chaos. The first step is to treat Slack like an asset instead of treating it like wasted space. A lot of people try to maximize every dollar, every hour, and every corner of their schedule, then act surprised when life becomes expensive the moment anything goes wrong. Empty space is not always inefficiency. Sometimes it is financial protection. The second step is to build a tiny buffer before you chase bigger goals. That might mean $1,000, $2,000, or 1 month of basic breathing room. But the point is to create enough cushion that every small surprise does not instantly become a money emergency. The third step is to reduce the number of decisions your future tired self has to make. Default groceries help, autopay helps, automatic investing helps, recurring calendar reminders help, a simple weekly money check helps, and a short list of fallback meals helps. The cheaper choice becomes much easier when it is already decided. Empty space is not laziness when it prevents expensive decisions. It is financial infrastructure. The fourth step is to stop solving every problem at the last possible moment. That sounds obvious, but it is where a lot of money leaks. Booking earlier, maintaining earlier, checking earlier, renewing earlier, fixing earlier, and preparing earlier all look boring, but boring timing is usually much cheaper timing. The fifth step is to protect time margin even if it feels unproductive. One unscheduled evening, one admin block each week, one grocery reset window, and one quieter day each month can save more money than people expect because those small pockets of room prevent stress from snowballing into paid convenience. The sixth step is to stop calling every convenience purchase a treat. Sometimes it is a treat, but a lot of the time it is really a symptom. If you constantly need to buy relief, buy speed, buy recovery, or buy friction removal, the deeper issue may be that your life is too tight. That is important because you cannot solve a margin problem only by shaming the spending that comes from it. You have to reduce the conditions that keep producing the spending, the part that really matters. If your financial life has felt more expensive than it looks on paper, there is a good chance the problem is not only what you buy, but the conditions under which you keep buying it. A life with no margin turns ordinary inconvenience into repeated cost, and repeated cost is how a lot of people quietly lose years of financial progress. The goal is not to become some perfectly optimized adult who never gets tired, never runs late, and never pays for convenience. The goal is to build enough slack that convenience stops running your financial life. Because once you have margin, you make calmer decisions, catch problems earlier, wait for better timing, avoid more panic costs, and give your money a real chance to stay in motion. That is what financially stable people often have that stressed people do not. Not better morals, not a magical app, and not infinite discipline. They just have enough room to avoid paying urgency prices every week. The less cornered you are, the less everything seems to cost. And once that starts happening, life gets cheaper in a way that feels almost unfair. Because the less cornered you are, the less everything seems to cost. That is the hidden rule. Normal life is expensive, but normal life under pressure is much more expensive. And if you want your finances to change, one of the smartest things you can do is stop asking only how to spend less and start asking how to create more margin. That question can change a lot.